Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory. I'm Nagma. Joining me is Professor Harsh Pant. Some of the main points that we would be analyzing on this episode of the Ideas Factory are China and of course, the development in Afghanistan, India's stand on Afghanistan, and is Philippines actually going to see a change in leadership? So, all that we will be looking at on this episode of the Ideas Factory. Let's begin with the aggression, with the Chinese aggression vis-a-vis Taiwan, which is not really a new thing, Harsh. But this time, probably a record flights, jets flew over Taiwan. Taiwan has registered a complaint. It has been protesting, but China. If we look at why is China doing this, what the timing, the withdrawal that took place, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, does that kind of strengthen China more? That's also something that one could be looking at. What does it really mean? What is it signaling? Though this is not the first time. Also, I remember when the American leadership changed, when Biden took office, even that time China had carried out regular flights over the international waters between southern part of Taiwan and the Taiwanese controlled Pratas Island in the South China Sea. And now this that again was probably sending a signal and testing what is Biden's attitude towards Taiwan. Right now, how do you see this increased aggression?
Nagwa, thanks. It seems that Chinese on the question of Taiwan are certainly becoming more and more aggressive and pushing the envelope to a point where perhaps it might become just impossible for the US in particular to ignore the developments. And then they are testing how far they can go. So we have seen these record number of fighter jets flying, including nuclear bombers over Taiwan. We are looking at a gradual escalation in this. The numbers have increased gradually, and they have been doing it now for a year, and more than a year now. And in fact, as you mentioned, when Biden administration had just come, there was an escalation, and now we are again seeing an escalation. I think that the larger fact that US China competition is heightening is perhaps one of the reasons why we are seeing this escalation, because Taiwan will be, if not already is, the most important fault line in this relationship. And as the US makes its intentions clear, I think the idea that, on the one hand, you had the Afghanistan withdrawal from Afghanistan, but on the other, US has been very keen to suggest that it is going to be in the Indo-Pacific, and it is going to play a major role in the Indo-Pacific with its partners and allies, with the AUKUS deal or with the Quad summit. I think there is a restlessness there in Beijing as to what it all means, and therefore, on Taiwan in particular, they want to see what America's reactions are going to be, because we have now seen Taiwan being talked about more openly by among like-minded countries in the region. Taiwan's relations are also becoming more and more transparent with some of the regional countries, and in particular, I think Quad talking about Taiwan Straits is also something that one needs to keep an eye out for, because for China, that's a real, that can certainly become a very, very important part of how they calibrate their regional policy. So on Taiwan, it seems that tensions are not going to dissipate anytime soon. And in fact, it might become the fault line that might generate more and more tensions, not only in the Taiwan Straits, but I think in the wider Indo-Pacific. So not only America has to keep an eye out, on what is happening there, but I think countries like India should also be aware that this is one fault line that can escalate very fast because of the, it, because of how Chinese have looked at the Taiwan issue and how they continue to emphasize on this issue as one of the main issues on which they can probably do anything. And I think that is the concern, that these increasing number of incursions, that this increasing belligerence towards Taiwan underscores. And I think this is an important fact, something that has been going on now for a while. But as it escalates, perhaps it's important for all regional stakeholders to keep an eye out for, in terms of how it develops and what sort of uh, you know uh, externalities it generates, because at the end of the day, this will have implications for US China relationship, and if it has implications there, it will have implications for all sorts of other platforms, bilateral engagements, trilateral engagements that we are witnessing in the Indo-Pacific. So I think for the Indo-Pacific, this can potentially become a very, very challenging issue.
But now China has gone all out, and this was probably the record, the largest incursion by Beijing so far. And Beijing clearly is trying to step up military and political pressure for on Taiwan to accept its sovereignty. Taiwan has been reacting, but whatever reaction is coming out of Taiwan, interestingly, Beijing is very upset even over the reactions and saying that some shrill noises are coming out and the flies are humming and from Mao. So, you like you very clearly stated that this is going to impact the China-US relationship and every other country in the region. But would we see any kind of reaction on what happened lately, the incursions that took place, the Chinese jets that flew over the area?
I think at the moment, Americans will continue with what they have been doing now for the last few months, and in fact for the last 2 or 3 years, which is strengthening their security relationship with Taiwan, which they are supposed to do under their own law. And I think in terms of statements, like we have seen, for example, Quo talking about it, or other by engagements in the Indo-Pacific that they have, that they are that they are involved in. All those sorts of engagements also now increasingly focused on all kinds of issues, right? From South China Sea, East China Sea, and Taiwan Straits has now become one single continuum. That this is all part of this larger structural shift in the region that America and its partners will have to be somehow responding to. What is interesting is that I think at some level, how other countries relate to it and react to it, because American position is relatively clear that they have a law, as part of their domestic law they have to help Taiwan in terms of meeting its defense needs. But what are the responses of other countries going to be, uh, will also be an important marker in how Indo-Pacific's strategic evolution shapes up, because Taiwan has for long been an issue where major stakeholders have not spoken, either, and they have been very, very covert about their engagement with Taiwan itself. So I think as you move forward and as this issue escalates, it would be very interesting to see how other stakeholders react and relate this to their relationship with the US, and how far US sees this as an important aspect of its own bilateral engagement with individual countries, including, like countries like India or Japan or Australia or ASEAN member states. So I think we are in on this question itself. We are in for some interesting times and interesting conversations beginning to happen as you look at America strengthening its own approach towards the region, as well as making it very clear that it intends to stay and work with its partners and allies. And if Taiwan is the one question that generates the most heat, then America's allies and partners really cannot be away from this question.
Absolutely, China has been also pointing out that it is that the flights, the incursions that are happening in the airspace is also targeting basically the U.S. and Taiwan collusion, as China calls it. But America and especially President Biden is in a lot of trouble, and things are not really good for him after the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was criticized heavily even within the country. Now, look at what is happening to his pet bills that he was very keen on getting passed and which were part of his campaign promises. So, the social spending plan and the infrastructure vote has been delayed, it has been stalled, though he's very keen to get it through. But the spending bill that he's keen to get passed, which according to him would actually restructure the country or get the economy back on track, is not happening anytime soon. The discussion has been stalled, it's getting dragged, and his ratings are falling. So, and at the same time, the Democrats are keen to see this through. So, how is it really going to affect the domestic politics? His ratings are already low, and now he's not able to actually, his pet projects he cannot see through.
I think these have been difficult months for President Biden, last few months, and we have seen the slide ever since Afghanistan fiasco. And now we are looking at the domestic political calculations. You would recall, Langma, we used to talk about this when Mr. Biden had come to power, that this is going to be the most important fault line for the Democrats, this centrists versus the progressives, and exactly that has happened. If you look at the infrastructure bill, that is so important from the perspective of from what Mr. Biden says, the economic revival of the U.S. post COVID. We are now looking at this divide where the liberals and the so-called progressives are pushing their own agenda, and they are saying unless you also unless you link this with the 3.5 trillion welfare and energy bill, climate change bill that they want to pass, we are not going to help you on the infrastructure bill. Now, this is, I think, a very, very unique situation for Mr. Biden to be in, because here he is with very slim majorities in both the House and the Senate, and his own party is not together on this question, and he would have liked to see this bill pass. And we have seen this divide between the progressives and the centrists becoming more and more serious. On this question, of course, the progressives have now completely laid down the gauntlet, and they are not moving forward. They say they are not interested unless something considerable is done. Last week we saw Mr. Biden putting in a lot of effort. He himself went to the U.S. Congress. He himself reached out and tried to get a deal done, but it could not happen. And I think the challenge, therefore, for Mr. Biden is how does he make sure that his developmental agenda does not stall. And this is always a slippery slope for any president when his or her poll numbers don't look so good. And
Yes.
then I think everyone wants to pitch in and make the most of that vulnerability. And I think Mr. Biden is at that vulnerable moment when he is now being pushed from all sides, and it's not entirely evident how he can manage it without giving in on towards one side or the other. And once he gives in, then I think it all changes dramatically, because then if he gives in to the demands of the progressives or to the centrists, I think then he would have made a choice, and that choice would reverberate across his next 3 years. So I think this is a delicate moment for him, coming after Afghanistan. My own sense is that he will be politically vulnerable for some time now, and I think for him it's important to push this right now, because next year, midterm elections, when the Republicans can come back, and Republicans are hoping to come back, I think that would make him even more vulnerable. So, presidents and administrations generally have a few months of honeymoon period. Mr.
He did not
Biden's
get.
honeymoon period ended very, very soon. So I think he's in for troubled times.
Very soon. He hardly got it. Yes, his approval ratings have dropped and he's politically vulnerable. The Afghanistan fiasco, of course, continues. And recently, Harsh, at the US India Strategic Partnership Forum, we got to see very clearly what is India's stand on Afghanistan. Foreign Minister Jaishankar has stated it very clearly that the developments in Afghanistan are going to impact the entire region and all of us in a big way. And also very clear that we are in no hurry. India is in no hurry to recognize the government, which is not at all inclusive. Also pointing out that India was not really consulted or included when the talks were taking place for the Doha deal. How do you analyze this? India stating it very clearly at the US India Strategic Partnership Forum.
I thought that was an interesting conversation, because you know, of course, we had seen Prime Minister Modi last month in the General Assembly also stating quite categorically as to what India would like to see happening in Afghanistan. So now there is a certain the matrix of India's Afghan policy is becoming clearer. But I think what was important also for Foreign Affairs Minister to highlight, the fact that India actually had not been privy to some aspects of the Doha talks, and then Doha agreement. And I think what it does is it also in a way lays down a marker for Washington that, look, a lot of these problems are America's own problems. That it's the way America dealt with Afghanistan, the way America dealt with its withdrawal, is something that that had not been very, very thought through, that have not been thought through properly, and the consequences are quite visible. So I think India was also in a subtle way sending that message, that we were not kept in the loop, and now that things are unraveling, it is important for India and the US to work together. And I think that was also part of what Dr. Jaishankar said, that there are differences on certain aspects, but I think by and large, India and America are on the same page when it comes to two or three things, like inclusive government, like the rights of women and minorities, like Afghanistan's territory not to be used against third countries for terrorism. And I think those challenges are not unique to India, but I think India embodies them in a way that, because of the past experience, that it can articulate it much more cogently and much more explicitly than, say, several other countries. And so that by doing that, I think India has made it. India had made 2 points. One, that America's recent decisions, including the Doha talks and the Doha agreement, and then the precipitous withdrawal, have actually, led to some of these challenges that we are facing, and also the fact that India is willing to work with the US where their interests converge in Afghanistan. And as we saw when Mr. Biden welcomed Mr. Modi, both in the bilateral statement as well as in the Quad statement, Afghanistan was mentioned. So I think we are moving to a point where US-India divergence exists on certain issues, but the convergences on Afghanistan are being used to frame policy responses at this particular juncture.
Right. We're almost done with time for this week, but I would, some of the questions the viewers have sent in, and a quick comment from you on the prospective leadership change in Philippines, because the Philippine president has announced that he would not be running for the elections next year, but that paves the way for his daughter. How significant is that, his announcement that Duterte would not be in the race? And one question, if I would add, Akshay Pandit has sent a question about the credibility of UNGA eroding because of episodes like Myanmar and Afghanistan. Representatives were not allowed to address the UNGA. Is UN victim of petty politics or P5s? So if we have time, very quickly, Harsh, if you could comment on that.
Well, I think on Philippines, it is, it's very difficult to say, Mister. The Philippines Filipino president is known for taking U-turns, so it's very much possible that tomorrow he'll wake up and say, no, I want to run. But I think at this stage, what makes this interesting is that he has been in power now for 6 years. He'll be in power next year for 6 years, and I think what he seems to be understanding is that it's not worth dismantling the institutional architecture of Filipino constitution for his personal gains, especially if he can gain in ways either through his daughter or through some other person that he can control. So I think we will have to see how this drama unfolds. But what makes the present president in Philippines interesting and important is that he has moved back and forth between US and China. When he came to power, he was extremely pro-China, and now suddenly in the last few years, we have seen him moving or gradually balancing it out. And Philippines is a very, very crucial state in the Indo-Pacific for the Americans, given their security arrangements with the Philippines, and given that Philippines potentially is also a swing state in the ASEAN framework. So I think both China and the US will be watching this very carefully. On the other question of UNGA, UNGA or United Nations platforms have always been political platforms. To expect them to rise above petty politics is not something that serious students of IR or serious observers should do, because they are political instruments that are used by individual nation states for their own purposes. So all issues are played out like that, both in the UN Security Council as well as in the UN General Assembly. But the question here, which I think Ashok is asking, is very, very important, that if you have two issues like Myanmar and Afghanistan, which are actually not being addressed by a body like UN General Assembly or United Nations in more general sense, then what is the validity of Afghanistan? It is not a very. It is not. It is a question that Indian Prime Minister also asks. That what are you doing when there are so many fires raging in the world? What is the response of the UN? It has been very, very underwhelming. So I think that question is a very, very important question for UN's own credibility. But I think petty politics of any kind, this is inherent in the way UN is set up.
All right. Thank you so much, Harsh, for those comments. So that's it from us on this episode of the Ideas Factory. Do send in your questions. We shall see you next week. Thank you.